Hi, my name is Dylan Eustachi, and this is my video for German Expressionist films. Starting with my opinion on The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, I was really pleasantly surprised by this film since I'm typically not a big fan of silent films, but I was finding myself really easily immersed into the world of this story and really finding myself understanding the tone more than anything. And I think that the sets really accomplished this for me. I've never seen film sets that were so distant from the real world that literally seemed like they were just art installations behind the actors. Every single set piece looked like it was made of paper mache or painted on to a just fully painted on. And it was really interesting to look at because it almost looked like a older version of what would be a modern day Tim Burton movie where everything is distorted and slanted but drawn on and looks like art. And I found that this kind of distorted art-like background and setting made the tone, the macabre tone, really set in for me and helped to immerse me in the overall story. One shot in particular that I think does this is when Cesar, the sleepwalker, is taking Jane after he kidnaps her up this, I'm not sure if it's a hill or a corridor since the sets are so abstract, but he is taking her up this steep incline and it is zigzagging in every direction and you don't even have any idea really what it is, but it really helps you to feel what the characters are feeling. It's disorienting, it's scary, and that's really in line with the story and the overall tone. As for Nosferatu, I had seen the film before, and on second watch, I still really don't like it all that much because I really just, unlike the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, I can't get immersed into the story. But I do really enjoy the makeup and the lighting design. I think the makeup is really spectacular for the time, especially with the prosthetics on the fingers and the ears. They look very real. I'm someone who comes from a background of makeup and doing prosthetics, so I think they look really good and it really helps to immerse you at least in Nosferatu as a character. The lighting also really helps establish Nosferatu and his kind of imposing big towering persona. And one shot in particular that does this is about 30 minutes into the film, Hutter opens a door in Count Orlok's castle to see Nosferatu standing in a room. The thing with the lighting that is so cool to me is that Nosferatu is completely lit by just a small triangle of light that lets you see the horrifying vampire, but everything else in the room is dark, and that stark contrast is jarring, and seeing a vampire for the character Hutter would also be jarring, so it kind of helps you feel what the character is feeling, and that really helps with my immersion, at least in certain points of the film. Moving on to similarities and differences with these two films as German Expressionist films, I would have to say that one similarity they both have is with their mise en scène, really portraying the monsters as complete antagonists and the victims as, well, victims, the protagonists as victims. And I think this really goes into the overall theme that most of these movies have, is that these monsters represent authoritarian rule in Germany and the protagonists represent the victims. The scene that I think does this in Nosferatu is the scene not far after the one I stated previously, but it is the first scene where Nosferatu is actively coming towards Hutter. This shot shows a pointed door with complete darkness behind it and slightly lit sides of the door, the left side having what looks to be a wall of what could be caskets or coffins since he is a vampire. But coming from this darkness is the towering figure of Nosferatu, and he is getting taller and taller in the frame as he moves forward, becoming more and more of a threat. As the authoritarian people come towards the innocents, they are more and more of a threat. And that is done by everything in the shot, which is their mise en scène. As for the shot that does this in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it is the scene in Jane's bedroom. Though very different tonally and aesthetically from the scene in Nosferatu, its mise en scène does the exact same thing with creating a sense of victimness for Jane. And in this scene, the camera is completely static on one shot, and it is the background of Jane's room and her bed in the left foreground with her sleeping on it. And coming in through an open window is Cesar the Sleepwalker. He is coming towards her very slowly and patiently, but holding a knife. And this scene is very interesting to look at with its mise en scène because it has much less set decoration than the rest of the film, so the vastness of the room being nearly empty gives this eerie sense of emptiness that something is missing from the scene, and it makes the audience feel at ease because we are putting ourselves in the eyes of Jane. We are the innocent victim as the big overarching presence of Caesar, aka the authoritarian regime, is coming after us. And this is done by everything in the shot, making Jane the victim and making Caesar the villain. As for the second similarity, it would have to be with the lighting design and once again setting up the monsters as true monsters and using the lighting to make them seem like they are the biggest threat that is happening in this film. When the sleepwalker first grabs Jane, slightly after that scene, all you can see is a circle illuminating them. It's a vignette, if you will, closing in on them, creating nothing but shadows. Behind Caesar and Jane is nothing but shadows. Caesar himself is shrouded in shadows, and Jane is there, a beam of light. She is light and pure. The light over her makes a white cast, and white is the color of purity. She is the innocent, and Caesar is coming from the shadows to murder her. He is the enemy coming at her, and the lighting is doing a really good job of showing this because in any sort of literature or storytelling, darkness means evil and light means light. This same technique can be used in Nosferatu when Ellen takes her first look at the vampire. He is similarly shrouded in complete darkness with only his figure being lit as she stands in her bedroom. Most of the scene is shrouded in shadows, but she is still completely lit. So the monster is in darkness, completely shrouded. He is the epitome of evil, while she is the innocent woman in all white. As for the differences between the two films, I found the biggest difference to be in the sets. Since German Expressionist films are often marked by their extreme abstract sets that really show a sense of disorientation, I think that there's a big difference in the sets in general. The carnival set from the Cabinet is extremely busy and has a lot of slanted lines, disorienting scale. The mountains in the back are pointed as well as the houses. It gives a sense that this is an odd world that we should be aware of. Yet the sets in Nosferatu are pretty normal. They aren't very odd compared to the odd sets of the Cabinet. Most of them are set in real houses. The Count's castle is pretty standard for a Germanic castle, and the ship is a regular ship. There's nothing really special about the sets to help set the world. As for the second difference, the camera work in Nosferatu is much more experimental than the camera work in the Cabinet. Having a low-angle shot in Nosferatu was a very smart choice by the director because it helped to make Nosferatu look much more foreboding and added an extra layer of horror and an extra element of eeriness to the overall tone of that scene, which would be on the boat. While the Cabinet stayed pretty stagnant throughout all of its shots, really let the audience sit back and look, but did not immerse them so far into the story. There was no experimental angles that I saw, and everything was pretty stagnant, like we were sitting back in an audience watching a play. As for the reading, one thing that I found very interesting was the subgenres of German Expressionist films for that time period. There is a subgenre of German Expressionist films called street films that look into middle class to low class life in Germany at the time. They were about men drawn away from their simple and bourgeoisie lives, from the allure of the big city. They were often character studies as well as looks into middle class life. For example, there was one film called The Joyless Street, pretty well named for the genre, but was about how national problems affected the everyday people and caused a lot of spiritual and moral values, as well as the loss of spiritual and moral values, as well as excessive corruption. These films portray the harsh realities of middle-class life that escapist films often don't do, since many films are used to escape that everyday life. In conclusion, I would have to rate The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as an 8, mainly because it was a silent film that really had me immersed in the plot, and I am not very easily immersed into silent films. As for Nosferatu, I I still didn't like it. My second time watching it, I would give it a 5 because I know how revolutionary it is to the horror genre. But if I'm picking a vampire movie, I would pick Twilight over Nosferatu any day. But that is all for my video, and thank you very much.